The year was 1431, and a small group of Muslim settlers had just come into a coastal kingdom called the Arakan state. Once called Burma and now Myanmar, this ancient state housed a small fraction of people that would later contribute so much to its history. In fact, these people would have thousands of generations inscribed deep within the stories of Myanmar. And they would even help the British to win a couple of battles during World War II. Despite all that, they are currently being excluded from their modern counterparts, seriously being persecuted and angrily being rejected by their own relatives. As we speak, over 723,000 of them no longer have a place to call home. More than 100,000 of these people are being subjected to several crimes against humanity, and well above half of their population now lives in the largest refugee settlement on the planet. All because they were once Muslim immigrants into the Buddhist state of Myanmar. From the leaves of history, these people are called the Rohingya people, and they're one of the poorest humans in the world. Every day, many of their women and children either suffer from the elements or die from hunger. And out of the 135 ethnic groups in Myanmar, the over 1 million Rohingya people are the only ones considered to be outlaws. In fact, many government officials in Myanmar refuse to recognize their existence even, though the Rohingya people have existed for millenniums. In 2017 and 2018, their story became well known to the world as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Their sufferings became one of the hottest topics in internet folklore, and almost everyone who saw how unfairly they are being treated dropped a tear or two. But what exactly went wrong in their history? Why aren't they recognized by their own people? And why are they the target of several killings, rapes, and widespread massacres? In today's video, I'll tell you all about it, because this is the story of the Rohingya people, the most persecuted minority in the entire world, as proclaimed by the United Nations itself. So, let's start from the point of inception in the early 1430s. Back then, the Rohingya people were a group of Muslim settlers in the kingdom of Mrau that was independent of both Burma and the Bengals, but their peace did not last for very long. In 1784, the kingdom was captured by the Burmese Empire after several attempts, and this caused the Rohingya people to later settle down in the Arakan state. 40 years later, Burma itself was defeated and made a colony by Great Britain until 1948 when it gained independence. But before then, there was a massive migration of laborers into Burma from today's India, and according to some narrations, migrants from Bangladesh were among them as well. But wait, hold on a second. Isn't that supposed to be illegal? Well, not really. Because during that time, Burma was still just a province of British India. So, such migrations were considered internal, even though many Burmese aboriginals didn't agree with it because of some reasons. For one, they were Buddhists, and most of the immigrants were Muslims. Then again, the culture of the Rohingya just didn't get along with the natives. So, they attacked the migration as an incursion of unwelcomed workers, but there was nothing they could do at that time. A few decades later, everything changed when the Japanese forces invaded the British army stationed in Burma. I hope you remember that it's now called Myanmar. Okay, good, let's move on. So, when the Japanese came, everybody who benefited from the British rule was attacked. But something else was happening backstage. You see, during the retreat, the Burmese aboriginals also took their chance to vent their anger against the so-called unwelcomed workers. Tension broke out between the two factions, and in the end, the Muslim Rohingyans were displaced to the north and the Buddhist villagers to the south. For 3 years, this segregation continued until the British forces later came to drive the Japanese out in 1945, but not without help. Prior to the invasion, the British forces sought assistance from the Muslims in the north. In return, they promised them a Muslim state, but after World War II ended, the promise never followed through. That one unfulfilled promise later made Burma a great hell on earth for the Rohingya people. And it all began in 1948, when Burma became an independent country, free from British colonial rule. Since they now have the power, the Burmese natives began to victimize the Rohingyans. From seizing their properties to declaring them illegal immigrants, the Rohingyans were caught in a web of human rights denials. At some point, the Burmese government even made a law that defined which Burmese ethnic group would be allowed to gain citizenship. Only a few Rohingyas whose family had lived in Burma for more than 2 generations were allowed to acquire foreign identity cards. Although somehow, some of them still had access to citizenship and some of them even served in parliament. Things went on like this for a while. But then came 1962 when the Burmese military took over the government. Once they did, they limited the jobs and the kind of educational opportunities that the Rohingyas could pursue. They were prohibited from joining the military. Civil servants who were Rohingya descent were laid off and made to live under abject poverty in Rakhine, one of the poorest states in the nation. But unknown to the Rohingya people, those painful stunts were still mere intros. By 1982, their suffering scaled up big time when the Burmese government passed a new citizenship law. Under that law, many Rohingyas were rendered stateless. For the ones who were not 100% affected, they had access only to naturalized citizenship, which as we all know is the most basic level of citizenship. Even for them to possess it, they would have to prove that their family had lived in Myanmar before 1948. Likewise, they would also have to be fluent in at least one of the national languages. In all honesty, that requirement was very hard for many of them to meet, as the paperwork they needed as proof was either denied to them or unavailable. Consequently, many Rohingyas lost the right to the already limited education, rights to work, travel, practice their desired religion, and rights to healthcare services or even marry who they want. I'm sorry, did I hear someone say right to vote? Far from it. They can't. Like that wasn't enough to snuff the life out of anyone, the government launched Operation Dragon King, or Nagamin as the locals called it, in 1977. If not any other thing, that operation was targeted solely at the Rohingya people and it rained hell on them, from the destruction of their houses, to rape, to summary executions, forced labor, detentions, arbitrary mass arrests, and even enforced disappearances. The Rohingyas went through fire. Worst yet, all of these things were underreported by the media for many years and the Burmese government denied a ton of these allegations, although several sheds of evidence proved that they were behind it all. To run for their life, over 200,000 Rohingya people crossed over to Bangladesh, where they were harbored in refugee camps for a short while. But by 1979, many Rohingyas were sent back to Burma. For those who remained in Bangladesh at the time, life wasn't so easy, as the food rations were cut. From that alone, some 10,000 people died. Soon after the Dragon King operation, the government launched another campaign called the Operation Clean and Beautiful Nation. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that codename is enough to hint to anyone of the horrific violence that came with it. By the time the operation ended, over 200,000 victims fled to Bangladesh and other nations including Malaysia, Thailand, Saudi Arabia, and more. For the many decades that came after, refugees kept filtering out of Burma. But some factions of the Rohingya people called the Mujahids stood back and fought, thinking that they might have an opportunity to win back their freedom. Instead, the attempt was just a chaotic bloodbath that led to the loss of many lives. In the same vein, it also sparkled another Rohingya persecution wave and military crackdowns that lasted for many years. By 1954, the Burmese government quieted the Mujahids with the help of the Pakistani government who helped capture their leader named Qasim. But even after that, the cleansing operations never stopped. Instead, it was stepped up by many folds, causing many Rohingyas to flee the country. Since the late 1970s, over 1 million Rohingya people have fled Myanmar, but there was nowhere they could go except Bangladesh. Most other southeastern nations like Thailand and Indonesia turned them away. Back in 2015, more than 112,000 Rohingya people were stranded at sea because no one would accept them. So they had no choice but to return to Burma. Just 2 years after they got home, another horrific crisis broke out in 2017, and it was an all-out brawl where over 1 million Rohingyas were forced out of Burma. Again! According to many historians, that was the largest exodus ever recorded in Asia since the Vietnam Cold War. By January of 2018, about 3,321 Rohingya refugee tents were estimated in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Several studies also estimated that the Burmese soldiers had killed at least 24,000 Rohingyas at a go, raped about 18,000 Rohingya women and girls, while another 116,000 were severely beaten, plus another 36,000 thrown into fire. Ugh. As expected, the government denied it all, dismissing the allegations as mere exaggerations. But if things weren't as they claimed, how then do we explain why reporters from the international community who sought out to investigate the case were imprisoned? Well, by late September, a 7-member panel set up by the Permanent People's Tribunal revealed that the Burmese military was actually guilty of these crimes against the Rohingyans, but the international community has not been able to do much about it. Mass graves upon alleged mass graves of the Rohingya kept popping up all over Rakhine in Burma. By August 2018, more than 723,000 Rohingya refugees had fled to a camp in Kutupalong located in Bangladesh, which is the largest refugee camp on the planet. Several humanitarians have launched many campaigns to help them, but nature itself hasn't proven to be on their side. From landslides to monsoon rains and floods, many Rohingya people find it very difficult to survive in the camps. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, over 200,000 Rohingyas stand a great risk from the monsoons and the floods. So it's really hard to estimate how many Rohingya people have died from the crisis so far, all because they were once immigrants in a time when such was allowed. Several villages once filled with Rohingya people have been razed down and no longer recognizable. Some of those who migrated to Bangladesh and were not living in the camps have been declared by the Bangladesh government as illegal infiltrators. As such, the Rohingya people are now one of the most rejected people on the planet. Although as of 2020, the International Court of Justice has ordered Burma, now Myanmar, to cease all attack against the Rohingyas.